to heaven. It is 11:15 on your Wednesday morning. I hope you're well. Sally Pepper with you through till midday. So my next guest only discovered he was dyslexic when he was 42 years old. In his final school report, his head teacher said he was a lovely young lad, but wasn't very academic. Yet he went on to get a degree, a master's degree and a teaching diploma. Aidan from Derby has since gone on to write a book of poetry, short stories and prose, as well as a novel. And he's with me right now. Good morning.
Morning.
That's quite a list of achievements there for a not very academic young lad.
Well, what a damning thing to say to a kid leaving school. You know, to boost their confidence for employment and life.
Not much of a boost, really, is it?
Really,
Can you recall reading that report?
I can, and I kept it a long time. A little slip of paper that I looked at every now and then. Anger is fuel sometimes. So I was determined to show him, even though I'd never see him again, and everybody, actually I was quite bright and I was quite capable. And that every now and then it pops in my head and I think, you must keep going, you must try.
Because in actual fact, through your school years, I guess a lot of this conversation about your dyslexia will be hindsight, because at the time at school, you had no idea you were dyslexic.
Not at all. And really the awareness of dyslexia wasn't there. We're talking about the dark ages here. You know, quite a while ago in the 70s and into the 80s.
Yeah.
Nobody was really aware of dyslexia, or you were either in the class, or if I'd had a diagnosis at school, they would have put me in what they call the remedial class.
Yeah.
And then your opportunities to do any exams or learn were even more curtailed. So
in actual fact, you look back and think, all right, the school should have known, or somebody should have picked up on this.
Yeah.
But actually, thank goodness they didn't.
I'm relieved that they didn't, because it would have really stopped me. It's all black and white in them days. I think you were either bright, able, or we had a banding system at school. The clever ones and the not so clever ones.
Yeah,
And
I
it
remember
doesn't really
it.
work
I was in the same dark ages, sadly.
Yeah, okay. But basically, they would limit you in opportunities. And if I'd have been diagnosed with dyslexia, that would have limited me even more. But it would have been nice to have some help. So I was excellent at doing assignments, essays, but I was terrible at doing exams. But nobody ever picked up on why is this boy good at one thing, and he seems to do well. He gets B's and B pluses and so on. But when he comes to do exams, he's a disaster. So there's something there that should have been recognised. But
did you recognise that at the time?
I knew something was wrong, and I kept saying to people exams, and they just said, "Oh, you must try harder. You should apply yourself. Why don't you look at revising better?" But nobody actually told me how to do revising. How to learn, learn how to learn.
Yeah, and to store it in.
And to store it and recall it.
So then when people are saying really unhelpful things like, you know, you have to try harder, what does that mean?
It's meaningless.
Yeah, of course it is.
And it's actually very, very annoying. It makes you angry, it makes you very frustrated, because actual fact, I was working very hard to do my best. I was quite conscientious as a student.
And as you say, your coursework, you were clearly working hard and getting the grades to prove it.
That's right, yeah. But with dyslexia, very often they refer to it as the spiky profile. You can be very, very good at some things, and you can be not so good at others. For example, I'm pretty good at maths, but start going into areas and volumes and distances, I'm a bit weak in that area. And the response to the school was, you're being naughty, you're being difficult, you're being obstructive. And I, despite being reasonably eloquent and being able to talk back and say, well, you know, I just don't get it. I didn't get that help or that recognition. So they were pleased when we did well, or I did well. But when I struggled with things, it was almost like it just didn't matter. You just needed to apply yourself.
And were your parents frustrated by it, or did they?
Well, my parents are just ordinary people. You know, they wouldn't have an awareness of it either. And they'd come home from parents' night and say, well, you know, you really must try a little bit harder in X, in this particular class. And that was all they could do. I don't fault them for that.
No.
They supported me as best as they could.
But as you say, if someone had picked up on it, your life would have taken a totally different course.
Exactly. Yeah. It's but looking back, I'm not that sorry now, because if you want to write, it's almost it's a great thing to treasure. It's a great thing to be able to fall back on. So if you want to write about a character who's frustrated and marginalised and doesn't fit in, well, that's school for them.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah, so you can really kind of create that character because you know how it feels.
Yeah, but not write about me. It's not about me in stories, but you can harvest a little bit of information.
Of course. So we'll talk about that because obviously that's the latest thing you're doing.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about when you did finally get your diagnosis, which of course was quite late on really in the big scheme of things. But as you say, things were a bit different when you were at school as opposed to what they are now. And obviously it's a much more positive treatment of when children at school are diagnosed with dyslexia. They're not just shoved into the remedial class and forgotten about, which we do need to highlight. Obviously things are thankfully very different now. So we'll hear more of Aidan Parr's story in a moment on BBC Radio Derby. The lyrics are quite poignant in that song, I suddenly realised as well. Ava Max, So Am I. It's okay to be different. We're talking to Aidan Parr from Derby, who was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 42. He's just been explaining how back at school, it was very rare that they could kind of pick up on dyslexia. You were just frustratingly told, just try harder. You know, with your exams, you were obviously producing great results in some areas and not in others. Things didn't add up, but at the time, not properly questioned really, which probably turned out to be a good thing. Because instead of being put in the remedial class and forgotten about, which was the way it used to be done, you were able to go on your final report. Your head teacher said, a lovely young lad, but wasn't very academic. And you took that and held that close to your heart and thought, I'm going to show you.
Definitely.
And so you did a degree in electronics.
Yeah.
You then went on to do a master's degree in assistive technology. Explain what it was you ended up doing then.
It's assistive technology. It's an umbrella term. So if you've got an older relation at home, it's the pendant alarm. It could be a walking stick. I ended up, if anybody's heard of Stephen Hawking, the thing that talked for him, I used to fix them. That's how I started.
Wow.
And then working with people with autism and things to help them relax, to strategies to sort of get them back on track. But it was only till I started doing a PGDE, a teaching diploma, and you have to think about your own learning style. You have to think about what you're good at, what you're bad at, and how you would. And I thought, hang on a minute, this is all great at assignments, terrible at exams. So what's the element of doing an exam that you find quite difficult? And for me, it was suddenly glaringly obvious that it was memory. So people think that dyslexia is all about reading and writing, but it can be memory and recall as well. So I did one of the online tests. I think it was the British Dyslexia Association, and there's 15 questions, of which I think 12 of them indicated that I may have some problem with dyslexia. So I went and had a chat with one of my lecturers on the course, who said, "Okay, we'll go and get an assessment with an educational psychologist." And it's about an hour where you're pushed. You're pushed to recall things. You're pushed to write, to read, to recall, to put shapes into holes. Lots of things, and they don't let up. They really push you. And it came out that for me, recall, memory, was a significant problem. Of course, if you don't know that you don't know, and everybody around you can't tell you it's your memory, you tend to think that everybody's like this. Well, of course they're not. And I was liberated and furious, and I was angry for about 3 months.
Really?
Because I was sorry about regretting the past, and you have to sort it out in your head. And I was a bit of a pain to family and friends. You can turn into the witch finder general. You've got dyslexia. You've got and it's in families. I think it's a little bit in my family as well. But then you get to the stage where you think, well, hang on. If I was at school, it would be the remedial class. I wouldn't have had the adventures of hopping job to job, because what happened, I went through a lot of jobs. And the experience of life of living around the country and working somewhere for a couple of years and then moving on. So it has its positives. And having dyslexia isn't all just a series of negatives. If you talk to people with dyslexia, if they're listened to, they're very good at picking things out. They're very good at what is termed as hyper-focus. You can focus on air and go, that's the bit that's going to go wrong. But it's being listened to. That superpower almost, that you can sort things out. And observation and understanding things. Sometimes people with dyslexia can be very, very good at that. So I've tried to harness that more. And I was really lucky to have a fantastic dyslexia tutor who said to me, right, let's focus on the positives. In the week, your memory isn't so good, but you work incredibly hard. But you don't remember what you've done in the week, so you have no confidence that you've achieved things. So I want you every day to write down what you've done, what you've achieved. And at the end of the week, I went, God, the amount of stuff I do.
Yeah.
That immediately boosts your confidence up. It makes you realise that you do have capacity. You're not.
And when you're looking at it when it's written down,
Yeah.
do you then recall it?
Yeah, that's the cue. Sometimes a visual cue is brilliant. So if I had to read a journal article, I'd read it, understand it, promptly forget most of it. But if I highlighted the key bits, that's the cue, and it comes back. I know it then. But get me to sort of rote learn a lot of stuff. You can forget it, really.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do it.
But this is all about, and with a lot of things, it's all about how you manage it, isn't it? And you have to go through that process of the shock, trying to kind of take in what you're now having to deal with. In your case, it was kind of 3 months, and then turn it around to being right. Okay, well this is now what I've been dealt. I now know what it is I'm dealing with. So this is how to manage it, and turning it around to a positive is so important, isn't it? To then move forward, which moving forward you have, as you mentioned about so many jobs you've had. We've got another one to add to the list, which is author.
That's right, yes.
So what made you want to then start writing?
At junior school, primary school, I wrote voraciously. I read comics, books. The house was full of books. So I read and I read. And I wrote a lot. It's all childish things. It's all science fiction and, it's what I loved as a child. But when I got to secondary school, no, you don't write stories, you write essays, which are dry, structured things involving a lot of memory again. So it sort of died away. In my mid-20s, I had this bubble of poetry and writing, and I just wrote it all down and just thought, well, that's a load of rubbish. Forgot about it. And then I was working in Gloucestershire and I did a class, a creative writing class. Went there all in fear and trembling because it was full of people. Oh, darling, I've had a story published in a magazine. And I thought, well, I've done reports about assistive technology. And it's all sort of rather boring and dry. But it turned out that I seemed to have something. But I still didn't have the confidence, that I could do it. And about 2.5 years ago, I'm working and I'm, sitting with friends and I'm a bit fed up. I enjoy my job, but I'm not fulfilled. And somebody said, "Have you thought of this?" Yes, I've done that. And then somebody said, "In the ideal world, what would you love to do?" And I said, "I'd love to write." And they said, "Well, why don't you get on with it then?"
Brilliant.
And sometimes a friend like that is made of gold.
Yeah.
They're worth their weight in gold. And I just started to write, and it just came out of me. And I was also lucky that they put me onto a course at Nottingham College about writing and self-publishing through Amazon.
Yeah.
Kindle Direct Publishing. So your Kindle, you can produce an ebook and a paperback. So while I'm writing the book, I'm doing the course, and then they introduced us to poetry, and I thought, poetry, I don't even like it. And I thought, wow, actually, I love all this stuff. And then started to produce poetry, and I love to challenge myself. I love to learn new things, different sorts of poetry. And I thought, actually, you're not bad at some of this stuff. And the reaction from people in the class and friends and family was, actually, you're quite good at this, which also boosts your confidence
Of course.
a bit more. So I was writing the book, doing the course. They publish a book at the end of the course, an ebook and a paperback, and give me an inch and I'll take a mile, basically. So I started to finish the novel and then put it aside because I was struggling a little bit with it, and focused on the poetry I'd written and the short stories. But this stuff just exploded out of me, and it's funny and it's sad and it's angry and it's frustrating, because life is like that. People are like that. They're hilarious. People are, but they're also very sad. Their lives are disappointing. Their lives are difficult. So I tried to reflect that in what I was writing. So I self-published that, and that came out in March.
And that's called?
That's called Of the Sea.
Of the Sea. And that's your collection of poetry?
Poetry and prose,
And your novel, is that out yet?
The novel's just come out last week, and that's called Life and Liberty. So it's about a kid growing up in the Midwest. I was lucky in one of my jobs to go to Ohio for 3 weeks, a couple of years running. And it struck me, the place, how different it was to what I was used to. Very structured, very rigid, very rule-based, which I railed against straight away. So I tried to reflect some of that, and also my own experience. You try to pretend that it's not about you. And I've said this is not about me, but when I reread it myself, I go, there's a lot of you, Aidan, in there.
But then, as you say, you have to draw on your own experiences, don't you? Otherwise, what's the point? That's what life is all about. And actually, your experiences will be what many others will be able to relate to as well. I do want to just mention to you this text that's come through, which is a lovely text. What an inspiration. I was marginalised at school. It's a horrible experience. Good on you, sir, says the text.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
I appreciate that. And go for it yourself, is what I'd say back. Anybody who's in that, whether they're younger or they're older or whatever they are, if somebody said to you, you're not allowed to do that, or you can't do that, go and do it. Go and do it. And if you fail at it, that's the greatest learning experience in the world, because you'll know, I can't do that, or I'm not so good at that.
But you found it out for yourself.
I found it out the hard way.
Rather than someone else telling you.
And I would say, doing the writing, I'm great at the writing, but I found out the hard way. I'm not so good at self-editing or looking for spelling mistakes and so on. I've actually had people say to me, oh, if you had more confidence, if you only tried. And I thought, no, I know. Yes. I know what I can do. It's much better to let somebody else look at it. So again, a great friend, Victoria, read through it and she said, your spelling's going off a bit there. He said, your character here doesn't quite make sense. You need that. It's so valuable to try and do everything. One of the things, it sounds like I'm saying do it all yourself. You do rely on others.
Well, you should rely. And it sounds like you've had a fantastic support network around you throughout all the challenges that life has thrown at you and will continue to throw at you. And Aidan, it's been lovely to meet you this morning. Thank you for coming in and clearly inspiring others as well. That's Aidan Parr on BBC Radio Derby.